A negotiating team led by Ukraine's defence minister has met with US officials in Saudi Arabia. It's part of Washington's efforts to end the three-year war between Kyiv and Moscow. Despite the diplomatic initiative, Russian drones targeted Kyiv and Zaporizhzhia last night. Russia said it intercepted a Ukrainian drone attack.
Another night's silence is broken by the rumbling of explosions caused by a swarm of Russian drones headed for Kyiv. Most are intercepted, but not all. And once again, it's civilians who suffer. The Russian attack on Kyiv and Zaporizhzhia leaves at least 6 people dead and dozens wounded.
There was a flash. People shouted. It was scary. A person on fire was shouting from over there.
This latest Russian drone attack came just ahead of highly anticipated peace talks in Saudi Arabia, led by the US, which some hope could bring an end to the fighting.
I have bad feelings. I don't want this to go on. It shall end with talks. I hope it'll be over by the negotiations. We're waiting. What else can we do? We hope that everything will end and there will be peace in our country.
The talks in Riyadh kicked off on Sunday with Ukrainian Defense Minister Rustem Umerov meeting the US delegation. US and Russian diplomats are expected to meet on Monday. Ahead of the talks, some comments on Fox News Sunday by US envoy Steve Witkoff raised eyebrows.
Now, I've been asked my opinion, so about what President Putin's motives are on a larger scale. And I simply have said that I just don't see that he wants to take all of Europe. This is a much different situation than it was in World War II. In World War II, there was no NATO. So you have countries that are armed there. To me, it just does, I take him at his word in this sense. So, and I think the Europeans are beginning to come to that belief too.
While Witkoff expects progress in the talks in Riyadh, Russia and Ukraine are less optimistic. Ukraine sees the talks as purely technical, and the Kremlin expects them to be difficult.
For more on the talks in Saudi Arabia, we're joined by Joshua Shifrinson from the Center of International and Security Studies of the University of Maryland. Ukrainian officials are meeting with their American counterparts. The Americans and Russians speak tomorrow. How can you bring together two sides that refuse to sit at the same table?
Well, so what the United States is doing right now is what's called classic shuttle diplomacy. The United States is literally, the U.S. delegation is literally shuttling between different talks. And I think the way to get the Ukrainians and the Russians to the same table is to actually come to some basic understanding, some basic framework for some degree of a ceasefire, which can then be seen as a mutually accommodating or mutually constraining agreement. And that's going to bring all parties to the table and hopefully catalyze more direct conversation between Russians and Ukrainians from there.
But that basic framework is anything but basic. It's extremely complicated considering these two sides are so far apart.
Yes. When I say basic framework, I simply mean a initial ceasefire agreement. Right now, we're discussing ceasefires on energy infrastructure, perhaps a technical moratorium that would allow for Black Sea traffic. Once those initial basic understandings are in place, it can catalyze a further dialogue. But as you say, the overall course of the conflict, the sources of the conflict are nuanced. It's going to be a complicated ceasefire deal. The Russian position, the Ukrainian position are very far apart. And certainly the United States, which wants to wash its hands of much of the conflict, is not making things any easier by imposing a very stark time delay or time limitation upon itself.
At the same time, let me put this to you. Russia has been ramping up military and political pressure on Kyiv ahead of the talks. Sergei Beseda is part of the Russian delegation. He was one of the intelligence officials who convinced Putin to invade. What's that tell you?
Well, it tells me a couple of things. Number one, it lets me know that the Russians could be ramping up pressure, largely because they do expect to reach some kind of ceasefire, which could freeze the line of contact, freeze the political status quo in Ukraine. So they're trying to get as much as they possibly can ahead of any ceasefire talks. That's point number one. Point number two, by sending an official who was responsible in many ways for the opening salvos of the conflict or played a key role, in the opening of the conflict to end the conflict, Russia is basically putting someone who has great internal political credibility as a hawk, as a hardliner, to bring the conflict to an end, which would actually might make it politically easier for Putin both to agree to a ceasefire, but also blame someone if the thing falls apart.
Is there something in all of this that gives you hope that we could get somewhere?
Well, the fact that the two sides are talking at all, or at least talking through the Americans, is certainly an optimistic sign. And also, I think your correspondent alluded to this, all sides of the conflict seem to have realized that the conflict is now in some kind of herding stalemate, where neither side, given what they are willing to mobilize, willing to commit to the conflict, seems to be able to make a breakthrough and on the battlefield. And under those conditions, it's not unreasonable for them to expect to turn to a negotiating table to try to ramp down the conflict, because if neither side can make a military victory, you might as well settle diplomatically while you can.
And Josh, what do you think about the Trump administration's choice of Saudi Arabia as host of the talks?
Well, certainly Saudi Arabia is not the kind of actor that you want to give legitimacy to, give credibility to any more than you have to. At the same time, because it's on the one hand a very large oil exporter, therefore it has ties to Russia, on the other hand, a key American ally and therefore has some degree of connections to Riyadh, it's in some ways the best of all terrible options as a meeting ground. But long term, of course, it would be better if there were another negotiating partner. And certainly we're going to need other actors to bless and sanctify and certify any ceasefire negotiation beyond just Saudi.
You heard it from Joshua Shifrinson. Thank you very much for your analysis. Great having you on the show.
Thank you.